All right. So we are recording, and if someone could just give me a hands up or one of the reaction buttons so I know if everyone can hear me okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Courtney. Appreciate it. All right. Well, again, welcome to Zoom into Archaeology, and I am so thrilled to introduce our speaker today. Our speaker is a University of West Florida archaeology graduate student, Courtney Boren. She's also been working with us here at the Florida Public Archaeology Network for a while now, and she kindly agreed to do a presentation for us based on the research that she's doing for her master's thesis. So thank you so much, Courtney, again, for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in digitally. I'm really happy for this opportunity. And so what we're going to talk about today are the people that were here before us in Pensacola. So I'm thinking that we probably have a lot of Pensacola locals here. I'm also a local. So the areas that I'm going to be talking about today are going to be a lot of Escambia and Santa Rosa County and some of the documents that relate to that. Today we'll be talking about the Ochuse and the Panzacola and some other tribes that were living in the area. I'm going to be using primary sources from Spanish expeditions, as well as I'm going to be throwing in some archaeology. I do want to point out, though, that the accounts are biased and they're not portraying any native voices. So they are from a Spanish viewpoint in the 16th and 17th century. They kind of have their own agendas that they're looking for, which what can we get from this land? What can we tell the crown? So some of the things that we do here, there's a reason for. Unfortunately, I don't know of any native accounts that pertain to the Escambia or Santa Rosa area for the 16th, 17th century. So this is what we have to sort of get a glimpse of the past. Okay, so I like to think of it as like a little eyeglass, okay? And each document that we get a little bit more information, and we can kind of add that to what we know. So the painting that you see here is by George Catlin, and it is from a period that's much later than what we're going to be talking about today. But the image depicts Native American life on Santa Rosa Island back then, and what it would have been like for hundreds of years before. Hanging out on the island here, you can see they've got a little lean-to that they've built. This is supposed to be the Seminole. They're drying some redfish. A lot of us, I know, fish for redfish today. There's definitely lots out there. And another one they mention a lot is mullet. Okay, here are some of the resources that, once again, we still use. We've got lots of muscadine grapes and a lot of hunters out there that love deer and turkey. And there's also picking berries with our kids, going fishing, like I said, the mullet, the redfish. There's a lot of natural resources here. We've also got lots of oysters, which were also utilized a long time ago as well. Oh, and I forgot this thing. I don't think I mentioned this little walnut tree here. All right, so when I say the word Pensacola, I'm going to try to clarify because it can get a little confusing. But the Pensacola culture existed along the Gulf Coast from Northwest Florida. Actually, quick question out there. If I move my mouse, can you guys see that?
Yes, we can, Courtney.
Yeah, okay, all right, good. I didn't know if it was just for me or if you guys saw it too.
Yeah, no, you're good.
So this area right here would have been the coastal version of the Pensacola culture. And what that means is when an archaeologist might say Pensacola culture, is they're relating the artifacts that they see that are diagnostic, particularly ceramics, and they're saying that they're all the same in that general area, and that becomes part of what the archaeologists called Pensacola culture. The Native Americans at the time did not run around and say, we are the Pensacola culture. That was something that archaeologists ascribed to them. So I want to get that out there. I will try to make it clear when I talk about the Panzacola. I'll try to accentuate that sound. And then I'll try to say, when I say the Panzacola culture, I'll say the whole thing so that you know that I'm not talking about the Panzacola. I don't want you guys to get confused. So what we're seeing here in this hatched area is sort of the boundary of the Panzacola culture. Like I said, the ceramics, they are shell tempered. And so that's one of the diagnostic markers. And depending on the surface treatment, you may know when in time that was. Over here, if you look in the area that is not hatched, just got the straight line, this is the Fort Walton culture area. And when I'm later talking about the Appalachie, they used a lot of the same artifacts that we do find associated with the Fort Walton ceramic culture. So we here, right, are in this overlap. So we get a mixture of both, and a lot of the documents that we will talk about, particularly in the 17th century, will talk about tribes from both that fit in with the Panzacola culture and both the Fort Walton culture. And I don't remember if I just said this, but the difference between the Panzacola culture ceramically would be that shell tempering, and then the difference for the Fort Walton is theirs is grit and grog tempered. And grit and grog tempered means that when they are making that vessel, okay, so when the Panzacola make their vessel, they crush oyster shell and put it into the vessel. And so like when they make it into the clay, okay, so it's helping reinforce it. The Fort Walton cultures, they used grit and grog. Grit is crushed up rock, and grog is crushed up ceramics. And so they put that back into their paste. Okay, so we're seeing that archaeologically. And so part of my research was trying to determine what ceramic assemblages are being used in the 16th and 17th century, and if any of that can be kind of tied to the Ochuse or the Panzacola. And just for further, for future reference, if you want to look any of this up, this image right here is from defining Pensacola and Fort Walton cultures in the Western Panhandle, and it is by Nora Harris. All right, so we're going to dive right into the 16th century. I've got a lot of documents to cover, so I'm going to kind of be talking fast-paced. Just somebody shout out if I'm going too fast. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is in the 16th century, and it's Panfilo de Navarro's expedition. It was a failed expedition that was supposed to go to Texas, but due to poor navigation and a hurricane, they ended up in Florida. They went inland and tried to approach the Appalachie, but they were hostile and pushed them south. So we've got one of the John Worth maps here. I think he's also in the crowd. He's done a lot of research on this exact topic, so I'll be drawing a lot from it. If you hear me talk about Worth, this is what I'm referring to as Worth research. There is some sources at the end if you want to look into that. So what we're looking at right here is the blue line, right? So it comes over here into Florida. This is where they landed. They go up, they try to go to Appalachia. They're like, nope, you're not coming here. And so they are forced to go down to the Gulf, and they have to build rafts to skirt along the coast to head back west to make it back home. The expedition, I think, started out with around 400 people, and there were only 4 survivors. So of those 4 survivors, we have Cabeza de Vaca. When he got back, he recorded his, or documented what his experience was during the expedition. And he was mentioning that they were skirting basically what we call the Pensacola region, in between Appalachia, right over here, and the Louisiana, okay, right where I just showed you guys earlier, that whole area. This is where they are skirting with those rafts. And they are doing it during hurricane season between September and November of 1528. So during their encounter, let me catch up with myself. They encountered coastal fishermen. A lot of them were in canoes. They see some of them fleeing. They did not want to have anything to do with the Spaniards. As they continued to go further west, they did find houses. Some were on islands, some were on the waterfront. And they said they were made of woven rushes or thatch. And they mentioned going and sort of helping themselves, or basically stealing some mullet and dried roe, because the Spanish were starving, and so once they flee, they're like, they're going to go up there and get some snacks. But as they kept going west, the Native Americans didn't always flee. So they also encountered, when they got more towards Pensacola, some Native Americans that came up to them. They wanted to try to get some food and water, and so they followed them inland. They were there and were offered fish and water, but then they attacked them later that night. So it was a very hostile encounter. And keep in mind, I didn't really mention this because we are in such a tight time crunch. Before Narvaez, after Ponce de Leon, so I know, actually you can see it right here. So Ponce de Leon discovered Florida in 1513. That kind of opened the doors to a lot of the slavers who were also sort of ravaging the Gulf Coast and the area when there's like new territory, you know. So they know about this, you know, the Spanish. They know that there are people that are coming and they enslave some of their friends, so that's why they probably have a negative attitude towards seeing Narvaez's expedition. So they keep going, and when they get closer to what they think is probably around Mobile Bay, the Spanish were greeted by 5 or 6 chiefs, and they noted that they wore their hair long and they dressed in sable cloaks. In the next couple of expeditions, you'll also hear me say that they mention these cloaks. And remember how I said they sort of have an agenda, so they want to mention those things because that's what the Spanish crown is going to find interest in, is, oh, they have nice cloaks, you say, you know. So it kind of explains why you would see that or why they would mention it. So during this encounter, they wanted water and food, so they exchanged 2 of the members of their expedition for 2 of the Native Americans that lived along Mobile Bay. So they kind of had 2 hostages. Later on that evening, so they took them, and the rest of the expedition waited in canoes. When they came back later that night, they came without their 2 expedition members, and then they were surrounded by more canoes. The Native Americans were pretty much ganging up on them and saying, no, you know, get out of here, and they end up fleeing. So they leave this area, and then about a day later, they reach the Mississippi River. So that's why I'm thinking that's more along the lines of the Mobile Bay area. All right, and so the next one that we have here that I want to talk about that basically has to do with our area is the Hernando de Soto expedition. And although he didn't come here per se, he sent Francisco Maldonado. And he sent him, well, he went to Appalachia. Unlike Narvaez tried to go to Appalachia, they would not let him in. Soto was able to actually winter with Appalachia. And while he was there, he sent Maldonado west to look for a port, and he found one about 60 leagues west of Appalachia, and this was where he captured 2 of the people of the Ochuse province. So this is where we get that first initial name of Ochuse Bay, and he also returns with a blanket of sables, once again mentioning, you know, the furs, some stuff that the crown would want to hear. All right, so this map is a little bit later, but I just wanted to point it out because it shows some good markers. We have the Ochuse here and the Tuscaloosa up here. Up here, you'll notice that I've got the spelling. There's 3 different spellings. Those aren't 3 different tribes or groups. That's just one. The spelling differs depending on which account you're looking at. And I do want to, I'm going to have it at the end too, but if you guys are interested in any of the DeSoto accounts with Maldonado, you would probably want to look at one of these to start out with. This is the DeSoto Chronicles. And it's actually 2 volumes. And through there, you can get more details because I am skipping through a lot of very interesting things and disturbing because he wasn't very nice. So as Maldonado basically captured those 2 Ochuse people and brought them back to Appalachia, and so DeSoto took them through the southeast, and at one point they're coming back down through Alabama, and we have the sort of the famed Battle of Mobile, and that's basically because Soto really offended the Native Americans because they are a matrilineal society. And what that means is that, so the chief, his sister's daughter, or sorry, his sister's son will be the next chief. So what Soto did was he actually kidnapped one of the chief's sisters, which is basically like, you know, her heir is going to be the next chief. So it was quite insulting. So they continue on down to Mobilia, and they're greeted and sort of brought in to the village, and they end up attacking them. So there is more on that. I'm not going to get into that because we have a lot to cover. But this is, at this point, we know that they are part of the Panzacola culture. They have a lot of the same ceramics, and there have been a lot of studies, especially from the University of Alabama, University of South Alabama, that have looked more into their ceramic assemblages and trying to hash out what happened during the Battle of Mobile. All right. Okay, so after that, the reason why this, another reason why this ties into Pensacola here, is that after the battle, the Ochuse captives that he had taken before told him that they are about 30 to 40 leagues from Ochuse, and so he lets them go. He's hoping that he preserves their friendship for later. Later on, DeSoto goes back to the Mississippi, or goes towards the Mississippi River, and ends up dying, and the expedition also did not end well. Okay, so now we are going to go and talk about the Tristan da Luna expedition. Let's see. So by the time that Luna arrived, it appears initially that it's less populated. The Ochuse province that he was kind of hoping to lean on was no longer there. He did have 4 native women that Soto had captured from the, you know, from the previous 20 years. He had them come with them to help, and they encouraged Luna to bring his own food and supplies and support themselves and not rely on the Native Americans. I think they knew it wasn't going to go well. So they, with that expedition, they actually came in with about a year's worth of supplies and planned on following through with, you know, what they had suggested about not relying on them. But then a hurricane hit with all the supplies. So that kind of ruined that. So shortly after their arrival, though, they head inland up the Escambia, and they go about 20 leagues, but about 10 leagues up, they actually encounter a small village. Here, they capture a woman known as Laxohe, and to use her as an interpreter. I think this is pretty cool because we actually have someone's name that lived here, probably in Escambia County, back in, you know, 1559. That's pretty cool. So they have Laxohe, and they come back down to the rest of the settlement to find out that the hurricane hit, and that's where, you know, things really start going south. So from those initial interpretations, that, pull out another book here, a lot of this that I've just talked about is in the Luna papers, okay? And in here, you kind of get the idea that the bay is very sparsely populated. He talks about there are some native fishermen and they have some huts. And, but then recently, Dr. John Worth has interpreted some new documents, or at least new to me. And one of them was from the expedition's pathfinder, Domingo Veloso. And he reported that the Native Americans defended the entrance of the bay when they came in and actually tried to attack Velasco, which is quite different than sort of the earlier image that we are given. We also learned that 10 leagues up the river, there was a village called Hala Hala. I'm thinking this is probably the same village that we talked about where we got Loxohe. And at this point at Hala Hala, there was apparently a confrontation and they had captured both men and women. And then one of the friars suggested, hey, we need to release these guys. We have to keep the peace. This is, you know, what the crown wants. And so they're already kind of stirring the pot by doing this. We also have other records that have just come to light that talk about the Native Americans attacking the villagers, the new villagers of the Luna settlement. We have Anton Gillian. He was a soldier, and there are records of basically his stuff being auctioned off because he was killed by the Native Americans in the area. So there's definitely a lot more resistance than what we initially kind of pictured. So with the hurricane and everything happening, and not having any food, there's not a lot of Native Americans to sort of rely on. They decide to move further inland to Nani Pacana. The first time they take a smaller detachment, and they are, you know, greeted hospitably by the village, but when they go back up to bring the rest of the 1,000 colonists, the people of Nani Pacana left. They did not want to have anything to do with the Spanish. They actually took their food, they took their supplies, and they implemented a scorched earth policy on their remaining crops. So they were not about to support them. So with that, the Spanish were starving. They're searching the wilderness. They did find provisions of corn and beans and like an earthen, like in their Indian pots or in their earthen pots, which is interesting because that's what I'm studying. So the fact that those could be carried around across the Southeast, very likely. All right, so now we are going to come out of the 16th century and we are going to talk about the 17th century. So just a quick recap. So the Ochuse were there in 1539, not during Luna's period in 1559. And now we are skipping up into the late 1600s. And I have in 1657, the name Panzacola pops up as a satellite village to the settlement of San Juan de Espalaga towards Appalachia. Okay, so we do know that their cacique's name is Manuel, and that Pensacola was a common Appalachian surname. We don't exactly know, we just know it's a satellite village associated with Appalachia. That may or may not be in Escambia or Santa Rosa. We really don't know. And that's not something that we can really pull from these documents right here. Whoops, oh no, oh no. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, there we are. Okay, and so another one that we have is in 1677. We have the Chisca, Chicado, and the Panzacola. And so 1677, the Appalachian requested help from the Chicado to attack a Chisca village. But when they got there, 5 of the 8 of the Chicado decided not to engage in the encounter because their own people, the Chicado and the Panzacola, were living with the Chisca. So this is interesting because it's showing the 3 of them living together somewhere along the Gulf Coast, roughly in our area. We also learned from that same account that the trail from the Chisca settlement to the bay, or the Gulf, was actually cleared and used by the Panzacola and the Chicado, and it says because they lived on the coast. And then another thing that came from the 1677 account here is that the Pensacola requested protection from the Choctaw with the North. So this is interesting because you'll see a sort of decline as we keep going through the documents, and they're having lots of warfare, and this is just beginning in 1677, and it's going to continue on in our next couple of documents. I do want to point this book out really quick. This is another one that is talking a lot about what I'm talking about. I got that right? Yeah, it's Han and Han, and it covers a lot more of the Appalachian tribes that I'm talking about if you want to get into further detail. All right, so we're going to continue on. In 1686, all right, this is one of my favorite expeditions, and the reason why, I'll tell you in a second. So Juan Enrique Barodo and Juan Jordan de Arena, they hired some Chine scouts from Appalachia to take them over to Pensacola Bay by ship. And when they arrived, they named the bay Panzacola. And this is because they were told that the people that lived there were the Panzacola. So this is actually how our city gets its name. So although there were Native Americans long before the Panzacola was the Ochuse, the name that stuck was Panzacola. And it probably has to do with a lot of the colonial interactions that happened. But I think that's an exciting tidbit. So they were informed this was the Bay of the Panzacola, and they actually visit a Pensacola village. They reported that the Native Americans brought the Spaniards a cross to kiss. So it kind of gives you the idea that they are familiar with the mission system. They are part of the, possibly really part of the Appalachia, like the Pensacola they're here, not the Pensacola, the satellite village, because we don't know if those were the same. Let's see, we also learn that the Panzacola fed the Spaniards corn and tortillas, right? So we know that they do have some sort of access to corn. And the Spanish traded them glass beads. Excuse me. We also learn more about their politics through the fact that they are also at war with the villages on the Mobile Bay or the Movila. And they're saying that there's lots of casualties and from them. Hold on, let me back up. Yes, so they tell the Spaniards that the Movila had, many of their people were killed and they destroyed their crops. And so they even tried to warn the Spanish about going further west into Mobilia because there were 3 strong, bold, and warlike villages. So they were definitely worried at the time. Sorry, that was not supposed to happen. Okay, there we go. Sorry, when I went backwards, it just messed up my whole thing here. All right, so the next one we're going to talk about is this one from 1686 as well, and this is Mateos and Delgado. And this one just, anyway. So also confirms that the Pensacola were at war at the Mobilia. But the part that I don't like is this, you know, it shows sort of the nasty side of back then, and basically Mateos wants something from the Panzacola. So they came to barter. In the previous year, they had obtained an arquebus, which is an old, basically an older gun for that time period. And they came in 1686 to get gunpowder and balls and trade, bring in some furs. But Mateos wanted the Pensacola to give them canoes and provide them with provisions so that they could get to the Mobilia. And they don't get along with the Mobilia, and so that at first they declined. But then Mateos basically threatened that he was going to give him back his skins, only give trading bells and beads to chiefs, which is insulting, to the Panzacola, because it's basically like you're not of high enough status to get this. It's not very nice. And so the Pensacola agreed reluctantly. They're like, okay, yeah, we'll do this. After he had even tried to threaten, well, we'll just go to the Mobilia ourselves. So it wasn't very nice. So they said yes, but then they went back, and then when Delgado got to the area where they were supposed to meet the Pensacola, they never showed up, and they had to push on by themselves. All right. And so the next one we have is going to be 7 years later, and it's in 1693. We've got a maritime expedition going on for Don Andrés de Pez, and we get some really cool data from Don Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora, and we learn about, sorry, let's see, this next slide is, okay. There we go. So if you want to look at this later, if I'm going too fast, this is all the things I'm about to mention. So during that expedition, they go over to East Bay, and that's which is over here, kind of Navarre Gulf Breeze-ish, right over here. They encounter two encampments that they name Robles and Baratillo. And I'm sorry if I'm butchering some of this pronunciation. But what I really, really like about this account is the cultural material that is mentioned, and that is the earthen pots and pans. We've got reed baskets, buckskin bags, wooden mortars, gourd dippers, gourd water containers, horn ladles, yarn made of buffalo hair, plumes of turkey and cardinal feathers, claws of bird and animal skins, wooden combs, buckskin shoes, an iron hoe, an iron adze, bows and arrows made of hard wood, tipped with bone, canoes, domesticated dogs. We also see something about their food, which is the fish, buffalo, squash, corn. We've got hides and pelts from buffalo, beaver, deer, otter, foxes, and martens. And then they also talk about some of the structures during one of these accounts. It was actually a single sloping roof for 2 huts, and that apparently it was done really well. Like they were really impressed with the way they stripped the bark off the pine trees to make this roof. So all those things I just mentioned. As archaeologists, a lot of those don't always persist. You know, they deteriorate before we see them. So the things that do last, you know, are those earthen pots and pans, or some of the shell, oyster shell, that would of course preserve it if there was a lot of things in that. But we're sort of seeing what we don't see archaeologically and why we see stuff archaeologically. It's kind of neat. And it's kind of another reason why, like I said, archaeologists rely on the ceramics, because they last through all that time. Also, I just mentioned that about the wood and the arrows made of bone. For those of us who don't know, here locally, we don't have a lot of local rock. So to get good rock to make spear points or something like that, you would need to either go north up into Alabama, or east over there towards Mariana, where you can get churks, and Tallahattas up in Alabama. So it's interesting because they mentioned here that their points are made of bone. And that's, I think a lot of it is because of the accessibility to that lithic material. Okay. Also in 1693, we got the land expedition of Don Loreno de Torres y Ayala and Fray Rodrigo de la Breda. And their accounts also talk about using the Chicado guides. So we know that relationship between the Chicado and the Panzacola. There's a lot going on there. They took the land route, and when they arrived, the Chicado brought them to a Pensacola village. I don't know if it's the same one from 1686, no clue. But when they got there, it was abandoned. So that is very unfortunate. They were kind of hoping they would still be there, and they were not. One of the documents, this is one of the originals. You can see they're here. They've got the Mobile Nation, and this is at war with, underlined right here. And also we learned from the 1693 accounts that it wasn't just the Mobilia, but also they were at war with the Apalachicola. Okay, so we are running short on time. Oh, no, go back. So I'm going to try to be quick through this. We also have some documents from 1698. They don't really have a lot in them, but this is when they established the Presidio. An unknown number of Chicado and Panzacola did come and live near the Presidio, but probably just as much or even more than that number moved west and abandoned the area entirely. In 1699, the name Panzacola pops up. Apparently they were singing when the Calumet was given to Iberville. Is basically when the peace pipe was given to Iberville at Fort Marpaz in Mississippi. Okay, so we know that they're going west. It's trackable. And in 1700, a guy named Charles Levasseur spends the night with the Pensacola at their village, which is then at the mouth of the Tensal River. We also have in 1704, this is when the Appalachian mission system collapses. And the Appalachee, Chicado, and the Yamasee actually move towards the Presidio Santa Maria de Galvez. And so now they are the Native Americans in the area. Eventually, they also continue to go west and settle among the French and Mobile with the Petite Nations. In 1711, we also, that surname of Pensacola pops up in Appalachia. It is way further east, and so the relationship is really unknown, but it's just interesting. The same sort of the Panzacola surname, the language. It does pop up San Luis de Talamali near St. Augustine. And in 1725, one of the last ones we have is the Panzacola living with the Biloxi on the Pearl River. And here we find out that they are good hunters. There's about 40 of them. They're trading meat and skins with the French. So that's pretty much it for our historical documents. Okay. So what does this mean, I guess, for the Native Americans in the Pensacola area? So like I said, from my research, trying to figure out what ceramic culture is matching up with the Ochuse or the Pensacola, or if at all. And so I dated 12 sherds, sent them off for optically stimulated luminescence. They were collected from the Luna settlement and from a site on Santa Rosa Island. So both within our area, Scambia, Santa Rosa area. 3 of them showed up before we would have had any of these historical documents that I just mentioned. And a lot of these are really interesting because these are all part of the sort of Pensacola ceramic series, and these all tie in very well with the Pensacola culture. We see a lot of these at Bottle Creek, which is where the Pensacolas are related to the Bottle Creek in some way. A lot of their culture comes from there, and then Bottle Creek actually, even before that, kind of stems from Moundville. So we have a lot of close ties. The next one we have for the 16th century, you can see we have the Pensacola incised. If you're like, what are all these type varieties? Don't worry about it. It's if you're really looking at it, you want to get into it. But what it basically means is these ceramics, for a long time, hundreds of years, sort of persist, and they're going on. The Pensacola incised variety of Pensacola, you know, that appears for a couple hundred years. These sort of surface decorations that we're seeing. So this is around the time during Luna, so 1536. This is when we're just talking about Soda's era. Same thing over here. We've got this D'Olive and more Pensacola incised. This is roughly Luna's era. We've got the 17th and 18th century. So these are both still being lumped under Pensacola incised. And so we can see that those same Pensacola ceramic traditions are persisting even, are persisting even into the late 1600s. So if you're interested in seeing what those dates are, or if you're into ceramics, this would be a good slide for you. But otherwise, what I think this is basically showing is the Ochuse and the Panzacola. We can't say like the Ochuse became the Panzacola. We don't know that kind of stuff yet, or if that's even, you can ever determine that. But the ceramics and a lot of the culture that is persisting from the Ochuse to the Panzacola is still persisting. Like a lot of, especially the ceramic culture, we're still seeing them producing a lot of the same ceramics up into the later points of the 1670s, where some of those ceramics were showing up. 1685, I think we had one of them, plus or minus 30 years. So, and that one was pretty slam dunk common for the Pensacola culture. So it's continuing, and people in the area are doing it, whether or not it's the Panzacola, can't really say, but the Panzacola are here when they are making those Pensacola ceramics. I also wanted to provide you guys with some of the modern day Native American communities. We have the Muskogee Creek Nation, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Seminole, and the Chickasaw. We have those, as well as some more local ones. We have Porch Creek, Santa Rosa Creek, and the Tunica Biloxi. They're from over there in Louisiana. But I wanted to incorporate them because if you were paying attention, in 1725, they were living among the Biloxi. So I wanted to put a link for them. So if you guys wanted to see what any of these nations were doing today, you can they have some history on theirs as well as some on some of their websites. They also have some of their events that are coming up. So ways that you can get involved that way if you are interested. I also provide here some select sources. This is not all the sources that I use to talk about today's paper. This is just some of them. And if you need more, let me know. Get in contact with me and I can definitely help you out with some more of those. And that is it. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you so much, Courtney. That was a great presentation. And I forgot to mention this to everyone in the beginning. If you do have questions, feel free to use the chat function in Zoom to go ahead and type them out. Or if you would prefer to unmute and ask them to Courtney, you can do that as well.
How do I look at the chat? Let's see.
Chat. Let's see. I don't see anything in there at the moment. You were so thorough.
I do see one that says, what is Bear Point? Yes, so Bear Point is an actual place. And if I mentioned Bear Point or the Pensacola Bear Point, it's because the ceramics that were found at Bear Point are part of the Pensacola culture, and so so they're called Pensacola in size variety Bear Point, and that means that they are like the Pensacola ceramics, but they are specific to that Bear Point area. So that is what that is referring to.
Where is the Bear Point area?
Let me see.
Just out of curiosity.
Let me see if I can. So it's over in between Florida and Alabama. How do I pull this up? I guess I can screen share again.
Yeah.
Hold on. Screen share. All right, let's see if we can go back over here and sorry, we're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. If there's even a good map to show. Oh no, that's not even a good one. Okay, all right. So this one is probably the best I can do here. All right, so I want to say Bear Point is like right over here. So it's right, it's right where Alabama and Florida are meeting. There's actually a place called Bear Point. Like I said, it was the Bear Point phase is just where you see those types of ceramics, and it doesn't happen just there. It happens kind of in our region, and that's how they kind of tie them together, is by that sort of that variety. Like, oh, this variety, which was originally found here, shows up here. And there's a lot of connections, a lot of ceramic connections.
Our modern borders are just that, modern concepts.
Yes, exactly. They were like, oh, we're in the Escambia County now. All right, let me stop screen sharing here.
Let's see. So any other questions for Courtney? Well, if someone is typing a question at this moment, I'll go ahead and I will just say thank you again for giving us a super thorough presentation. I think there's a lot of misconceptions in Pensacola about these particular aspects of our history. And so I think it's really useful to have someone kind of clear that up for us a little bit. So thank you.
Yes, of course. It was a pleasure. And if anyone has any other further questions, feel free to email me. It's CRB. I'll just put it in the chat, I guess. CRB36. Oh, nope, that was to Julie. Sorry, Julie. Okay.
While Courtney's doing that, I'll go ahead and I will do a quick advertisement for our next Zoom into Archaeology program, which is next Thursday. And we're going to be joined by a former FPAN graduate assistant. Her name is Melissa Timo. She's now the historic cemetery specialist for the state of North Carolina. And she's going to talk about some of her work in historic African-American cemeteries and how she's engaged some of the local communities to take on stewardship roles at those cemeteries. So she did all of her thesis work here in Northwest Florida. So she'll have a lot of really relevant information for us in this area as well. So look forward to that. The registration for that event is already up. It's on our Facebook page. It's on the Northwest events page. And I am working diligently on getting our November newsletter out tomorrow morning as well. So you'll see it there if you are signed up for our newsletter. And it looks like you do have another question there, Courtney.
Yes, so I've got one here that says where most of the pottery was found in mounds. During the 1900s, yes, a lot of it did come from mounds, and unfortunately from burial context. Today, as archaeologists, we try to avoid those as much as possible. That's not something that you really want to get tied up in. And so the pottery isn't always associated with mounds. I think the reason why it kind of has that stigma is because of those expeditions from C.B. Moore, which, you know, he has some volumes just showing basically pots from all of, you know, these mounds that were found in the southeast. And while some of the pots are beautiful, it's really like just disrespectful in a way, because it's people's cemeteries and they just kind of trekked through, ripped it out, you know, and then he puts it in a book. And so there is some data that archaeologists have been able to get from there. But nowadays, a lot of the pottery, you know, that especially for the stuff that I studied, it was not from a mound context. It was from sort of where the Luna settlement was, but on the components that were related to pre-Luna, or either on the beach too. So ceramics aren't just in mounds, they're also in shell middens, because that's basically a big trash pit, and there are multiple shell middens throughout our area. And they're neat because they preserve a lot of the bone that wouldn't be preserved otherwise. So you can see like all the fish they're eating, like what kinds of fish to the T. You can see how big. You can get a lot of paleo ecology clues if you're looking at the size of the oysters and stuff like that. Okay, good. That was helpful. Okay.
Yeah, that's super helpful because I think a lot of people conflate two mounds and shell middens. They think they're one and the same kind of thing, and they actually are very different.
Yeah, I mean, there can be shell mounds, but they are different.
I guess in archaeo speak, they're very different things.
Yes.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. Anything you want to wrap up with, Courtney? If not,
no, there's no more questions.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm going to go ahead and provide a link to registration for next week's Zoom into Archaeology. So it's right there. You can click on it right now and register. But otherwise, thank you again to everybody for joining us today. Courtney, excellent job. I learned a lot. And this presentation will be up on our YouTube channel, the FPAN YouTube channel, probably tomorrow or in the next couple of days. So if you have someone else you think might enjoy the presentation, you can look for it there. So thank you again to everybody. Have a great afternoon, have a great weekend, and enjoy the Halloween holiday.
Yeah, happy Halloween.
Yay. Bye, Courtney.
Bye.